Well, Jeff Carter, president of Bethany Theological Seminary, and I have the pleasure of speaking to the Reverend Dr. Dan Poole today, the assistant professor of ministry formation at Bethany Theological Seminary. So good to see you, Dan.
Thanks. Good to see you too, Jeff.
I want to give a little bit of a background on Dan and his history. So Dan served for 18 years in pastoral ministry, first at the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren, where Dan and I had the chance to meet and be in ministry together. I was serving a neighboring church and to play lots and lots and lots of racquetball. So Dan and I have known each other a long time. But after serving the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren as the associate pastor, went on to the Covington Church of the Brethren in Southern Ohio for 13 years. He was called to serve Bethany as the coordinator of ministry formation beginning in August of 2007 through 2017. Served a one-year appointment as the visiting instructor for ministry formation in 2017, 2018. It was a transition period, and then was called to be the assistant professor of ministry formation in the spring of 2018, which was a great joy for me, Dan, having known you so long. It's been good to be a trusted colleague. You went to Manchester University, it was Manchester College back then. You're a graduate of Bethany Theological Seminary from the Oak Brook campus,
Hmm.
and then went to Columbia Theological Seminary to get your DMin. And Columbia is located in Atlanta, Georgia. So a lot of history in the church, obviously, a lot of pastoral experience, which then you bring to your position in ministry formation. And so, Dan, let's begin. You served for all those years as a
Hmm.
pastor before coming to work at Bethany. You were a pastor as you worked at Bethany as well, and kind of
Right.
transition. What first got you interested in an academic career?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, honestly, when I was a student at Bethany, um, pastoral ministry didn't feel like the call at first. I was like, I'm gonna be an academic. I was like, I don't know how to do pastoral ministry. That call from God has to be wrong. I mean, but doing the seminary thing and finishing and um, ended up accepting a call to pastoral ministry, of course, as you have spelled out, and ended up loving it. Enjoyed that so much. But the academic piece was kind of always there, just kind of a curious piece of my life. But I had pretty much let that go when I had gone into ministry. And so when Tara Hornbacher, who's my predecessor in the ministry formation role, we were colleagues together in Southern Ohio before she got called to Bethany as the professor of ministry formation. And so she knew about me and it's like, hey, I need help, working with the students in this ministry formation class. Can you do a one class thing and help out with that? And kind of that's how it started. And if it was 2001, 2002, somewhere in there, started helping her with that class. And um, just sort of one thing led to another, and the opportunity opened up in 2007, as you said, for the halftime position, and so tried to juggle pastoral ministry with that coordinator position for a couple of years, and um, it was a difficult transition for the church, moving from a full-time ministry position to a half-time ministry position is a tough transition. I will say that. But we made it work for a couple of years, and then other things became available to me at Bethany, and so I transitioned out of the pulpit at that point. But yeah, that's kind of how it first started. Tara just reached out to me and said, "Do you want to help?" One thing led to another. I ended up getting my DMin, as you said, at Columbia Seminary, kind of in the hopes that when it was time for her to step aside, that I would be prepared and ready to step into that role, which did happen, and I'm grateful to continue to be able to serve in that way. So, a lot of stories that I bring with me into the teaching role, which I don't know if students love that or get tired of hearing them, but just like you, who did that for over 20 years, yeah, there's just a lot of really relevant, experience and material that you bring to that opportunity to teach and to share, kind of what you experienced and what you did to work through those things. And not that you always have the answer, but you can bring some relevant conversation to the point at hand. And so, yeah, that's been fun.
So when you think about that history, obviously there's teachers and mentors and authors, having that academic interest that
Yeah,
that were influential for you
yeah,
as you kind of went through this journey. Can you name some teachers, mentors, authors that meant a lot to
for
you?
sure. Yeah, for sure. I think of at Manchester, my time there, Dr. David Eiler was the professor of New Testament and was a wonderful mentor to me. Um, Kind of the first person to kind of help me believe in myself, moved me into a kind of out of that sort of Sunday school stage of my growing up years and into sort of a more academic approach and understanding of the New Testament was still a great passion for what the scriptures teach, of course. And Dr. Kendall Rogers, who was a colleague here at Bethany as well in history, was a professor of philosophy and religion at Bethany, and so he too was a wonderful mentor. Wonderful classes that he taught at Manchester that were, very small seminar classes where just a few students, and he would get into some wonderful, deep conversations. Philosophy, you can get lost in all kinds of silly stuff, but it was great times, good conversations, and just um, a wonderful mentor in teaching me kind of how to pay attention to that teaching craft. He was an excellent teacher in that regard. Um, Certainly, my time at Elizabethtown, Dr. Wayne Judd, who was Reverend Dr. Wayne Judd, who was an incredible mentor to me early in my ministry. So green, so clueless with how to do this pastoral ministry thing. And I knew that when I graduated from Bethany that I'm like, I am not ready to take on a solo pastorate, and I wanted to learn um, under somebody kind of how this whole thing works. Very much that tutelage model, and Wayne was an excellent supervisor. Used to frustrate the heck out of me because, you know, he was very clear about not telling me what to do, but helping me figure it out. Right? He was a wonderful mentor in that respect. That I completely get what he was working at now. But yeah, he was tremendous. Growing up years, of course, several pastors that I had that were influential to me, but probably Fred Klein was the one who I can remember the most, who first called out the gifts for ministry in me and sort of named that out loud. Was the first to do that. He was a great mentor, and certainly in a remarkable way, Dennis and Carol Horn, who were members at Wabash Church where I grew up. Um, they they were just um, the quintessential brethren people. They taught it, but they lived it. Everything about them just you know uh, purely genuine brethren folk. And he was my youth Sunday school teacher and my youth leader, and was just an incredible mentor to me growing up. And sort of really instilling those values within me at an early age, and developing that curiosity. He had a wonderful approach to teaching the Sunday school lessons you know that really engendered curiosity and wanted that from the kids, to just dig into it and bring the questions, which was wonderful. So that was a wonderful mentor to me growing up. So those are the people that I think of when I think of the mentors through my life.
Yeah, and the one of the unfortunate things is many denominations get smaller, so the congregations are getting smaller. There's fewer associate pastor positions. You and I
Right.
both started out as associate pastors. Now, we probably could have taken on a church someplace and have been a solo pastor, but we chose to be in that associate position, and a willingness to be mentored. And the
Right.
great thing is when you graduate from seminary, you do not have all the answers. And you don't have this breadth of experience that you can call upon. But in working with someone, like for me, it was Fred Swartz, someone who has all this experience and education and has put it together over the years, you can then
Right.
rely on them. And Wayne Judd was clearly a figure like that at E-Town.
Absolutely.
And both those churches that we served were large churches where we were
Hmm.
associates. And then we, obviously grew into being in senior positions. That's
Yeah.
something that I, as the church, as congregations get smaller, I'm looking for those opportunities where we might create or recreate those mentoring spots. So
Yeah.
the change. I mean, you and I both have experienced a lot of change in ministry. You're a Bethany grad. You graduated from the Oak Brook campus right before we moved to Richmond.
Hmm.
Obviously, the seminary has changed and the church has changed since you were
Yeah.
a student and young pastor. What has changed about the challenges that face clergy in congregations, and how has Bethany's approach, how has it changed in preparing
Yeah.
pastoral leaders? So, kind of a two-part question. What's the big change that you've seen, and how are we responding to that change in the way we educate?
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I mean, as I was preparing and thinking about this question, that's it's such a huge one. I mean, there are so many elements and pieces to that, as you know, because change is so complicated, not only sort of within the church, but just within society, within the world at large. There are so many changes that have happened within the last, generation that changed the complexion of how the church works in the world. But I think you named it, like just the number of churches that not only can have multiple staff, but even full-time pastorates has diminished considerably in the last 15 years, 10 years for sure. And so it changes the complexion of what pastors are doing. As we're well aware, the denomination is working at this very proactively around, multivocational ministry and realizing that persons have to do multiple jobs now just to make ends meet. And that's certainly a factor when students come to us now in that preparation. But I think one of the changes that we've seen in the congregation is this, that because of those forces, those elements related to the shrinking and the small, the diminishing of the denomination as those pressures happen, that as both of us have taught in the field of family systems theory, that generates a lot of anxiety, and so a lot of congregations are fraught with conflict and are just full of that anxiety because of those forces. And so I think that's changed the dynamics of what pastoral leadership looks like and how we prepare students for leadership in those roles. And I approach it the kind of the there's no longer an assumption that our students that are coming to the MDiv are also going into congregational ministry. That has really shifted as well. Many come with a whole host of creative ideas, which is really exciting. The entrepreneurial reality that's developing around pastoral leadership is exciting, although it continues to be challenging for congregations that are still looking for pastors, of course. But I think building uh, the curriculum to help students prepare for that pastoral leadership role through like family systems theory, understanding how they are as leaders in a context, that they pay attention to their own anxiety so that they can be, more non-anxious as they're leading and as they're working with congregations that are very anxious, and that the system that's very, concerned, rightfully so. Um, that's one of the primary things that I think I build to how we're preparing persons for ministry. I also rely heavily on a sort of a fundamental approach to the spiritual disciplines, that in order to be healthy and to be well in ministry, one has to tend to those things. It's also um, builds that one of the buzzwords of the last 4 or 5 years, Todd Bolsinger and others have talked about is that resilience, which I think is right. If there's a rightfully an emphasis on that. We've seen persons that encounter their first conflict in ministry, and their instinct is to kind of run away rather than digging in and resolving that conflict and figuring things out. And so, uh, looking at how we can build those kinds of uh, forms of resilience in our ministry students, to prepare them for the reality that congregational ministry is pretty challenging right now. And so the more you can be, I think, upfront and real about that with students, in preparation, I think is good, to kind of help them be ready, because it's going to be hard. Um, and I think, uh, one of the other kind of changes is just the sort of, uh, I'm sad to say this, but the sort of divisions that we're seeing, in not only society but in congregational life, the fractures that are happening. Um, was having lunch with some congregation members yesterday after preaching, and they were talking about, yeah, there's another couple that have decided to leave congregation over political, disagreements, and I think you're just continuing to see how that fracturing is playing out, and that's certainly a stress, I think, on pastoral leadership, and kind of how to be present in those kinds of moments when the rest of society seems to be wanting to sort of pick a fight rather than to work things out. So yeah, I could go on and on. There's a lot of things obviously that have changed and are changing, and I think one of the realities that, as Bethany has, expanded our portfolio with regard to what degrees we're offering, is, one of the things that gets me excited is, sort of the synergy that happens between the MDiv and, say, the master's degree, where students are thinking about what that multi-vocational ministry looks like going forward, right? So they're thinking about spiritual direction and pastoral ministry, or nonprofit leadership and pastoral ministry, and how they can kind of put together sort of multiple tools in their tool belt for being successful in ministry, and they kind of come with these really great ideas about how they can string these things together in a very creative way. So, um, that gets me excited about that.
It sounds as if you're teaching life skills. It used to be, I remember, when I was a pastor, folks would be like, well, coming to church on Sunday was a, metaphorical sanctuary, right? It was a,
Hmm.
a physical sanctuary, but also it was a sanctuary from life. But those divisions you're talking about have permeated the church. And so what we see on the news, whatever news we choose to watch, is also a part of the church. And so these life skills of being a non-anxious, non-reactive presence, which I think is really a challenge right now, is important
Hmm.
for pastors, but it's important for us as people. And then this idea of resiliency, which is the buzzword.
Yeah.
But how do we do hard things? And maintain a sense of self is incredibly important. Now, I need to pick apart a bit of your language because you're using some good theological talk. So you said, if you're teaching folks to be non-anxious, non-reactive, and to build some sense of resiliency, you also depend on the spiritual practices to help
Hmm.
undergird that. Dan,
Right.
what are the spiritual practices? Can you name a couple of them?
Well, sure. So, we work at exposing our students to a whole host of what those might mean, but there's the classic spiritual practices like just the work at, I always blank on his name. Um, the annual review, or the daily review of what's happened,
Examine.
right?
Yeah, the
Examine. Thank
examine.
you. For whatever reason, I always blank that out. But yeah, those kinds of practices where we do contemplative practices, we work at those kinds of things. We work at, just whatever the kind of spiritual practices that exist. There's a whole host of them. Reading scripture, praying, obviously, to name a couple of classics. But what are the ways that those students can find spiritual practices that enrich their life and find a way to, you know, as has been said, open up space for how they're going to be with God, which is really what the spiritual practices are for. And so that resilience comes from them not just sort of feeling like it's just going to happen naturally in the course of their work as a minister. We've both seen people that, like, you know, if you just take that for granted, it's not going to happen on its own, right? You have to be intentional about that. You have to be committed to that. You have to give time to that and space for that. So all the ways that we work at those, um, yeah, and
And I love that you said it's not going to happen on its own, and you and I both have seen individuals that just because they get older they don't become more mature. Like maturity is
mm,
a process that you have to put some time into, and
right,
the examine. I mean, you use that as an example. What a
yes,
great prayer, not just for pastors but for all of us to sit and to think through. Right, our
yeah,
relationship with God, but our relationship with others, what we're thinking and feeling and understanding. And I
right,
know in leadership, in teaching leadership, you and I both teach leadership, that's a core component to be able to one reflect on
yes,
what do you do, but then also why are you thinking what you are thinking? And so
right,
much of that has to do with the family systems piece, or your
right.
experience or life.
Or why did that thing, you know, push your buttons? Or why did that thing make you, you know, react in the way that you did? That reflective practice is, yeah, so essential. And doing that through the lens of that spiritual practice, you know, gives you sort of that graceful space to kind of like not be overly hard on yourself, but to be honest and to have that place of like, it's important to examine that. It's important to look through that. You know, it's a constant process, as you know, to continue to grow each day, and um, that requires effort and intentionality, which, you know, again, that's built into what we're teaching. But that's, yeah, for sure. Reflection practices are so essential. Yeah.
What's a bit ironic is that people think about the spiritual practices as reading scripture, praying and fasting,
Right.
maintaining the Sabbath, and yes, those are all spiritual practices. But when students engage you in your classes, they walk away saying, "I didn't know that this is actually considered a spiritual practice, like
Right.
reflection,"
Right.
and it's a tool that they can use then in life. And you use two terms again, seminary terms, the MDiv and the Mast. You're talking about the Master of
Right.
Divinity. Most
Thank you.
folks get a Master of Divinity to be a pastor or a chaplain. And so you think, yeah, the spiritual disciplines for those that are seeking to serve the church. But the MAST, which is the Master of Arts in Spiritual and Social Transformation, often is that entrepreneurial spirit of individuals that are going out in the world to serve nonprofits or to create really positive change, not necessarily in the church, but outside the church. And those spiritual practices, boy, we need to use those to build resiliency and to have folks with non-anxious presence. So
Right.
because you're in ministry formation, people might narrowly focus that as, oh, those are for pastors or
Mm-hmm.
chaplains. But really, we're talking about a way of being in the world, which everyone
Exactly.
can I think benefit from. So we've got these college students that are coming in with the new Lilly Grant, right? So Lilly Grant received $10 million from the Lilly Foundation. We're offering theological education on soon 6 different college and university campuses. We've started now with 2. What has you excited about this opportunity? Because we
Yeah.
know that the rising generation is as spiritually curious as any other generation.
Right.
So for you, what has you
Yeah.
excited?
Well, and what's exciting about that too is that it seems like the rising generations like not as shy about talking about that. Whereas like the generation before and the couple generations before, just they wanted to talk around spiritual language, but they didn't really feel comfortable using that language. Whereas I think the rising generation is fully on board with, you know, being upfront that this is a spiritual question or this is a spiritual concern, and they're not afraid to use that language. They're much more excited to dig into it, and that they don't want necessarily sort of traditional forms or necessarily like the same thing that your grandfather did, but they're not afraid to use that language. So that's exciting. And as you think about you know, one of the realities facing the church, of course, is pastoral leadership. And I think what excites me about and working with the college students is the opportunity to to curate and to cultivate that curiosity early on. They have these impulses and these interests, and they want to make a difference in the world, right? They want to change things. They want to make the world a better place. And I think one of the things that they're excited about is to do that, but don't always connect the dots that maybe that's something that can happen through ministry, or that they can think about ministry in a much more broad sense about what can I do to make the world a better place. It may not be the pastor or congregation, but how do I, like as you said, go about being in the world? How do I live out these principles? How do I be present in a way that does make a difference in my daily living? And so the seminary having access to these students to kind of give them sort of laboratory space to explore those ideas and to dig deeply into that, to make them able to connect those dots, is really exciting. And it's you and I both, I'm sure, we're tapped early on in life saying, you really ought to think about ministry. You have skills and I think the sooner that happens in a person's life, the more they're able to reflect on that and to think about that, to pray about that, to see what that means for them, rather than saying, oh, okay, now you've graduated from college, what are you going to do? Right? It kind of feels a little bit too late to kind of put those questions into the hopper. And so what excites me about that is being able to generate some of those conversations earlier for these students, that are still kind of forming and still deciding what they're going to do with their the developing life skills that they're getting at college, of course, but to fold into that these notions of service and being present in the world in a different way, and so that they can give them some theological language to play with. We can give them some ways that they can think about, yeah, I want to be an accountant, but let me think about how that looks differently if I'm an accountant this way, rather than just thinking about the traditional paths. Okay, so that does excite me a lot, and as I said earlier too, just the way in which the seminary faculty have been thinking through sort of the intersection points of these different degree programs, and how um, you know, they really do provide a lot of synergy that gets me excited. And so um, uh, I often tell students that I'm interviewing that are coming to seminary, like, if you're thinking about the MDiv, that's wonderful. And really, um, I think traditionally we thought of the MDiv, there's kind of, chaplaincy or pastoral ministry. Those are kind of the paths. But now I think it's only limited by what your imagination is. You can do a whole host of things with an MDiv degree, especially if you know, couple that with one of our certificates or one of our other degree programs that are giving you other skills that really flesh that out in a whole new way.
I
Yeah.
love, and I want to draw a circle back to one of your very first statements. You talked about, I think it was the horns.
Yeah,
Yeah, they were mentors to you when you were growing up, and what was instilled in you in Sunday school, but curiosity. And
exactly.
here, this program, what do we want to do? We want to enhance, encourage curiosity,
Yeah,
to ask the big questions, the what ifs, and to a generation, you're right, that is more willing to talk about spiritual things. And the big debate right now, and this is a different podcast, but a big debate, are we in revival as a country? Because we're hearing the younger generation speak more directly, emphatically about spiritual things rather than debate whether that's a revival or not. I think we lean into, yes, young people are wanting to talk about meaning making and
exactly.
these larger kind of realities outside of just technical ability and what job are you going to get. So it's a great
Right.
place for a seminary that's thinking broadly. So
Yeah.
so if we're thinking, this is the last question, Dan, if we're thinking about what we teach, it's obviously impacted by what you are reading and writing. So what are you reading and writing?
Great. Yeah, I mean, there's always so many things coming across my desk, of course, as you can imagine. But One of the things that I've been reading lately is Seek the Well-Being of the City, which is also subtitled Pastoral Leadership and Community. As I'm thinking about the course that we're trying to build for taking students to Miami, Florida, and the context there, and thinking about ministries in that respect, an immersion course that's around that. So thinking about resources that relate to that work of what does it mean to put our faith into action. And so reading through that book, um, let's see. Suicide in the Communion of Saints. You know, heavy topic, obviously, but thinking about the church's response to those that are surviving suicide from family members and those that are close to them. And it's a really good read on thinking about how to hold that differently rather than a sort of the traditional judgmental kind of approach to those that have committed suicide. It's we've had to deal with some of those heavier issues here at the seminary, and so thinking about how do I help students think that through as they're preparing for ministry, because they're certainly going to encounter that in their ministry. Another book, Navigating the Future, Traditional Innovation for Wilder Seas. Wonderful text. Just thinking about sort of uh, systemic change and change that's happening, innovative leadership kinds of principles. Thinking about one of your kind of favorite topics, which is emergent planning and what that means and how that works. And so Gregory Jones and Andrew Hogue are leaning into what that looks like on a much broader scale, but as it relates to ministry. And then uh, one of Richard Rohr's newer books, The Tears of Things, uh, The Prophetic Wisdom in an Age of Outrage. So, like thinking about the division that is reality, read that book with the book group from Manchester Church of the Brethren, and we read that together. So, really excited about thinking about ways that we can be. He digs into the prophets of all things and talks about the history of dealing with times of outrage in society and how we can be present with a faithful presence to be there for people to give them hope instead of uh, just anger. So
What
good
what I
read.
what I love what I love about that reading list, Dan, is thinking about the future, but then also thinking about issues that are very real, some that are
Yeah,
difficult to talk about, but that we need to again have non-anxious, non-reactive, resilient people out there that are willing to just live a healthy life in the world and helping others, then catch the vision of
yeah,
God's grace. So thanks for all those pieces. What a great
yeah.
interview.
Thank you.
We met more than 30 years ago
Hmm.
as partners in ministry. Then
Yeah,
we were opponents on the racquetball court,
yeah.
and then to be
Young
colleagues
Bucks.
now.
That's right.
Yep, to be colleagues now after all these years. Just want to thank you for one, your commitment to the church, two,
Thank you.
to pastoral ministry, both as a servant of the church and a servant to our students. And third, for your vision. You hold this kind of expansive vision for ministry that serves the present day in how we understand ministry, but then also is preparing folks for what might be coming and
Yeah.
a certain openness. So Dan, thanks so
Hmm.
much. And
Yeah.
for the Reverend Dr. Daniel Poole, thanks so much for the time today in this conversation.
Thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure.